I'd walked past Broken Falls 1,000 times. Its cascading waters a tranquil backdrop to my patrols. But the night I heard the echoes beneath the roar, I realized serenity often masks something far more sinister. The call came during my late shift. A hiker reported ghostly singing drifting from the fall's undercut basin. I grabbed my helmet light and descended the slippery trail. The moon was a pale smear in the sky, but the falls glowed under its light, water tumbling over jagged rock. As I crested the last switchback, the singing began, low, melodic, and achingly human. My helmet light caught movement behind the curtain of water, shadows flickering in the cavern below. I clicked the light higher and saw it, an archway carved by centuries of erosion, its entrance hidden behind the waterfall's curtain. The song stopped the moment I focused on it. Silence blended with the roar of water. I called out, voice echoing off the stone. "Hello? Ranger Ellis here. Are you okay?" No answer. Only the relentless thunder of the falls and my own pounding heart. My boots slipped on wet rock. Clenching my jaw, I slipped between the cascade and the cave wall. Inside, the cavern was lit by bioluminescent algae, casting an eerie blue glow on dripping walls. The air was thick with mist and the scent of moss. Then I heard it again, soft singing, directly ahead, luring me deeper. The melody was hypnotic, tugging at memory I didn't want to revisit. Curiosity and duty outweighed fear as I moved forward past rock formations that resembled twisted faces, each one seeming to watch me. That was when I realized I wasn't the first to heed that song, and I might not be the last to disappear into its depths. I advanced along the slick stone floor, every footstep echoed by dripping water. The bioluminescent glow pulsed in time with a faint hum, the song growing clearer, a woman's voice, sorrowful and sweet, as if begging for help. My flashlight beam danced over the cavern walls, revealing carvings, initials and dates etched beneath streaks of mineral deposits. Visitors compelled to record their presence, some as far back as the 1930s. I ran my finger over one set of initials, Elm 1938. A chill ran down my spine. That was 87 years ago. I paused by a pool of still water. Its surface mirrored the glowing ceiling like liquid glass. Leaning closer, I saw a ripple, and then the face of a woman, eyes hollow, mouth open in silent lament. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. The reflection smiled, though no breeze disturbed the water. My skin prickled. I spun around to retreat, but the passage had narrowed. Walls pressed in, stalactites dangled overhead like sharpened teeth. The song wrapped around me like chains, pulling me forward. I fumbled for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ellis." Static overtook my words. The hum of the song drowned out all else. I dropped the radio, its crackle lost under the melody. Flashlight raised, I searched for an alternate exit. That's when I saw it, carved deep into the stone wall, illuminated by phosphorescent algae. Return what was lost. My stomach nodded. An old ranger legend surfaced. Decades ago, a caretaker's young daughter, Marigold Whitmore, drowned in the basin beneath Broken Falls. They say her spirit never left, longing for someone to free her. Hikers reported whispers, soft crying, and that haunting lullaby. The song swelled again, heart-wrenching. I gripped my flashlight tight, blinking to clear my vision. The wet cave floor sloped downward, and somewhere beyond, I sensed movement. I edged forward, step by cautious step. By my side, the pool's surface began to ripple of its own accord. Water sloshed against the rock. Something shimmered beneath, an object half buried in silt. I knelt and reached in, cold water seeping through my gloves. My fingers closed around a tarnished gold locket, encrusted with moss. A single name engraved on its back, M.W. My breath caught. Marigold Whitmore. The locket belonged to the girl in the legend. I snapped it open. Inside lay a faded photograph, a smiling girl in a white dress, eyes alight with joy. Beneath it, etched in cursive, "My dearest forever." The instant I opened the locket, the singing stopped. Silence pressed in so heavily, I heard my own pulse. Then, behind me, a child's laughter, soft and mocking. I spun, flashlight darting across the cavern. Nothing but dripping water and dancing shadows. When I turned back to the pool, the photograph had vanished. A whisper brushed my ear. "Return what was lost," it said, and the ground trembled beneath my boots. A trickle of water ran down one wall, carving fresh channels through the rock. The cavern seemed to contract. Panic threatened to overtake me. I forced myself to steady my breath. Radio in hand, I called out. "Dispatch, I found the locket. Possible paranormal activity. Request immediate evac." My words dissolved. The radio display flickered and died. Torchlight trembling, I pressed onward past a cluster of jagged stalagmites, following the tunnel as it sloped deeper. Each step echoed, too loud in this unnatural hush. Then, ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Water pooled ankle-deep, reflecting that ghostly blue luminescence. At its far end, a natural archway led further into darkness. And from that darkness, the song resumed. Slowly, softly, drawing me in. I forced my legs to move. Each step felt like fighting through molasses. The walls here were slick with algae, and the air grew colder, bone-chilling cold. I shone my light across the chamber. On the opposite wall, dried handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the stone, as though someone had tried to crawl free. My stomach turned. Memories of my own grief surged, the loss of my brother in a flash flood 2 years ago. I'd never properly mourned him. Was that why the song felt so familiar? Why it tugged at places I didn't want to acknowledge? Lightning fast, a watery handprint appeared on the surface of the pool behind me. I nearly screamed. Turning, I saw the surface of the pool bubble. From the dark water, a pale hand reached out, its fingers slender and impossibly long. The hand trembled, beckoning. I tore my gaze away and sprinted toward the archway, water splashing around my boots. Behind me, the singing rose in volume, faster, desperate, like the wail of a soul in agony. I lunged through the archway into utter darkness. My knee hit something hard, and I tumbled forward, flashlight skidding across the stone. I slammed my hand down on the beam, flicking it on. The light revealed a ladder carved into the rock, ancient and slick. I grabbed the rungs and began to climb, heart slamming against my ribcage, muscles burning. Below me, the singing echoed, warping as though a chorus of voices. My breath came in ragged gasps. At the top, I hit a second cavern, this one narrower. A low wooden door stood against the far wall, warped by moisture. Etched into its surface, keep her safe. My hand trembled as I lifted the latch. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow shaft of moonlight piercing the cave ceiling, illuminating a stone altar at the center. Atop it lay a silver knife, and beside it, a single white feather. The singing ceased abruptly, as though someone had flipped a switch. Silence, and then a whisper. "Finish it." I stared at the altar, mind racing. The knife gleamed in the pale light, its blade stained rust brown. The feather drifted in a shaft of moonlight, quivering as though alive. A cold breeze stirred the chamber, carrying the faint scent of lilies, Marigold's favorite flower, according to old journal entries tucked away in the Ranger archives. I swallowed hard. The locket weighed heavy in my pocket. I knelt before the altar, knife in trembling hand. The walls around me were covered in more carvings, pleas for mercy, promises of remembrance. "We won't forget you. Forgive us for letting you fall." Each one felt like a confession. As I traced the words, the air grew heavy, and a soft singing drifted back in mournful. Suddenly, the ground beneath me vibrated. Water began to seep through cracks in the ceiling, dripping onto the stone floor. The carvings glistened with fresh moisture. I pressed the knife's tip against the altar's surface, heart pounding. A voice, soft, childlike, whispered, "Release me." I froze. The locket pulsed in my pocket, warm against my thigh. The same voice echoed inside my mind. "Release me." Hands shaking, I pulled out the locket and opened it. The photograph glowed faintly under the moonlight, Marigold's eyes seeming to follow me. I touched her face gently. "Child, I'm sorry." Behind me, the singing swelled into a chorus of voices, Marigold's voice, echoing again and again, pleading. I closed the locket and placed it on the altar beside the knife. The feather drifted down to rest atop it. A single droplet of water fell from the ceiling, landing on the photo. The image rippled, and for a heartbeat, Marigold's visage looked alive, her eyes pleading. I gripped the knife's handle. The voice came stronger now, more urgent. Free me. Memories flooded back, of my brother's laughter, the floodwaters, the helplessness. My chest tightened. I took a deep breath and raised the blade. Just as the tip hovered above the locket, a searing pain shot through the chamber. A deafening crack echoed as the cave ceiling began to fracture. Rock splintered overhead, and water gushed through the cracks, flooding the floor. I stumbled backward, dropping the knife. It clattered across the stone and slid toward the altar. The singing became manic, desperate. Water rose ankle-deep, then to my shins. I waded toward the ladder, but the shaft I'd climbed through was already below me. The rungs vanished in frothing water. A ghostly figure coalesced beside the altar, a translucent girl in a white dress, hair plastered to her face. Marigold Whitmore stared at me with hollow eyes. "I'm still waiting," she whispered, voice echoing off cavern walls. I crawled up my spine. She reached a pale hand toward me. The water surged, pulling me forward. I stumbled and fell to my knees. Behind me, the cave roof creaked ominously. Chunks of rock crashed down, sending shockwaves through the water. Marigold floated toward me, lamenting. "Why did you forget me?" I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I didn't forget you," I shouted, though my voice trembled. "I'm here to help you." Her form flickered, and the blade of the knife gleamed in her hand. She pressed it against the locket on the altar. I scrambled forward, water swirling around me. Just as she touched the blade to the locket, I dove, grabbing her wrist. The knife slipped from her grasp and clattered away. She shrieked, a sound that split the air like ice. I snatched up the locket and with every ounce of strength, hurled it into the rising torrent behind me. Marigold's spirit let out a final, echoing wail as the locket disappeared into darkness. The moment it was gone, the singing stopped. The water stilled. Marigold's form drifted apart like smoke, her eyes closing in peace. I crawled toward the fallen knife, pried it loose, and jammed it into the altar's cracks, wedging them shut. The chamber trembled violently. Rocks began to rain down. Gritting my teeth, I raced toward the ladder recess, slipping and sliding as debris fell around me. Behind me, the altar collapsed, dust billowing in a cloud of echoes. I reached the ladder niche, nearly chest-deep in water. With a grunt, I hauled myself onto the lowest rung. The stone above groaned. Fissures snaked across the ceiling. I climbed 2 rungs, then 3. Hauling myself upwards, the collapse accelerated. The water pounded against my back. With a final lurch, I burst through the rock ceiling into a narrow crevice of moonlight. I kicked and clawed until I broke through onto a rocky ledge outside the falls. I tumbled onto the grass, gasping for air as the cave sealed behind me with a thunderous crash. The waterfall roared once more, pure and unbroken, no hint of melody beneath its thunder. I lay on the damp earth, chest heaving, as water cascaded just inches from my head. Moonlight painted the grass in silver. The forest was silent. No more singing, no more whispers. My legs trembled as I forced myself to stand. Cold sweat clung to my shirt. Behind me, the base of Broken Falls glowed under the moon, water tumbling over stone as always. I wiped sludge from my hands, the knife and torn fragments of locket casing in my grip. My radio lay beside me, miraculously intact. I pressed the transmit button. "This is Ranger Ellis," I said, voice raspy. "I'm safe, but I need immediate extraction and backup at Broken Falls." "Over." Static crackled, then a calm voice. "Copy that, Ellis. Units en route. ETA 10 minutes. Over." I sheathed the knife and tucked the locket fragments into my jacket pocket. Every fiber of my being buzzed with adrenaline. I needed to file a report, but no one would believe this. Sirens in the distance echoed through the night. I turned away from the falls and started the climb back up the trail. Each step was heavy, as if the night itself weighed on me. At base camp, floodlights illuminated the area. Rangers in jackets and helmets called out my name. They guided me to the ranger station, Inside, warmth and normality awaited, a radio base, paperwork, coffee brewing. Captain Morales met me at the door, concern in his eyes. Ellis, are you hurt? What happened down there? I inhaled deeply. Something was living beneath the falls. A spirit. The words tasted strange on my tongue. He frowned. Spirit. I nodded, pulling out the locket fragments and the knife. Legend says the caretaker's daughter drowned here in 1938. She lured people in with song, seeking release. Tonight, I freed her. Morales exchanged glances with the other rangers. You're saying you? I found her locket in the grotto. I interrupted, setting the fragments on the desk. I placed it on the altar, freed her. The cave collapsed behind me. The song is gone. Silence filled the room. Then Morales gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Okay, Ellis, let's write up the incident. We'll seal off the trail until daylight. I nodded. Inside, relief warred with lingering dread. The night's terror still clung to me like wet clothes. As I sat and wrote my report, dates, times, hazards observed, no unusual rockfall, water levels normal, I realized something. The falls were quiet now, natural again. No echoes, no whispers. But in my pocket, the locket fragments were warm. Pulsing softly, as though alive, I emerged from beneath Broken Falls gasping for air, locket fragments clench in my hand. The waterfall behind me thundered, its roar now free of echoes. At base camp, I filed my incident report, no unusual hazards, water levels low, no visitors in danger. But I kept what remained of the locket. Sometimes, late at night, its surface warms, and I swear I hear a soft singing carried on the wind. Broken Falls is just a stop on my patrol route. A beautiful one, luscious ferns, mossy boulders, crystal clear water. Yet I know what lies beneath, a memory, a spirit, a warning that loss can haunt us until we find the courage to let go. If the echoes under the falls gave you chills, hit like, subscribe for more Ranger encounters, and share your own brush with the unknown below. And remember, sometimes the things we think lost are waiting for us in the darkest depths, calling our name. I never believed in legends. Not until the night Hemlock Ridge Park turned on me, when every tree seemed to breathe with malevolent purpose, every shadow whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear, and the wind carried a cry so primal, so utterly otherworldly, that it didn't just shake me to my core. It rewrote everything I thought I knew about the darkness that lurks in wild places. The call started just after midnight, cutting through the steady drum of rain on the patrol cabin's tin roof. I was alone, hunched over my desk charting wildlife activity reports by the amber glow of my kerosene lamp. The generator had failed again, leaving me with only primitive light against the storm's fury. My pen froze mid-sentence when the windows didn't just rattle. They screamed in their frames, glass flexing like it might shatter under some impossible pressure. At first, I thought it was thunder rolling down from the peaks. Then the howl erupted from the forest depths, a sound so inhuman, so filled with ancient rage and hunger, that it seemed to pour directly into my bones. It wasn't the cry of any wolf I'd ever heard in my 15 years as a park ranger. This was something else entirely, the voice of the forest itself, twisted into a wail of pure predatory intent. My flashlight slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the wooden floor as the howl rose again. Closer now, so close, I could feel it vibrating through the cabin walls like claws scraping against my skull. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, above, below, seeping through the very wood of the structure that had been my sanctuary for 3 years. Heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal, I grabbed my heavy-duty raincoat from its peg and seized the storm lantern, its reliable weight a small comfort in hands that had begun to shake. Outside, rain pounded the roof with increasing violence, each drop hitting like a bullet, and thunder didn't just shake the ground. It seemed to crack the very foundation of reality. With each reluctant step toward the ridge trail, the howl echoed through the storm, weaving between thunderclaps like a siren song, as if something ancient and impossibly hungry was deliberately guiding me deeper into its domain. I faced poachers with rifles and bad intentions, tracked down panicked campers lost for days in the wilderness, even battled a minor forest fire that nearly claimed my life 2 summers ago. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for this. This felt different. Wrong. Like the natural order had been inverted, And I was no longer the protector of this place. I was prey. Lightning split the sky overhead with violent intensity, its electric fingers revealing the twisted silhouettes of Hemlock's ancient pines in stark, nightmare detail. In that blazing instant of illumination, I saw movement at the tree line, a dark shape hunched impossibly low, too large for any wolf, too fluid for any bear. Its eyes caught the lightning's glow like twin embers, burning with an intelligence that made my blood freeze. When the thunder rolled again, a bone-deep rumble that seemed to emerge from the earth itself, the shape was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. But the howl lingered in the air like a promise, a threat, an invitation to something I wasn't sure I could survive. Clutching my storm lantern so tightly my knuckles went white, I stepped into the deluge, rain immediately soaking through my supposedly waterproof gear. Lightning illuminated my face in the cabin's window for one last time before I turned away from safety. I had one crystalline thought cutting through my terror. Whatever lived up there in the peaks, whatever was calling to me with that inhuman voice, it wasn't just not human. It was something that had been waiting for me specifically, something that knew my name. The storm came on faster than any National Weather Service forecast had predicted, as if nature itself had conspired to trap me in this nightmare. By the time I reached the trailhead, a simple wooden marker that now looked ominous in my lantern's sickly glow, wind had transformed the rain into horizontal needles that found every gap in my protective gear, piercing my skin with icy precision. My radio crackled with violent static when I tried to call the main ranger station, desperate for any human voice to anchor me to reality. But only bursts of electronic white noise answered, punctuated by sounds that almost resembled whispers in a language I didn't recognize. I toggled my storm lantern to its highest setting, its lantern green glow barely managing to cut through the downpour that seemed to swallow light itself. My waterproof boots, reliable for 3 seasons, now sank deep into waterlogged mud that sucked at each step like the earth was trying to hold me back. As I climbed the familiar switchbacks toward the ridge, a path I'd walked hundreds of times in daylight, each flash of lightning revealed a landscape transformed by wind into something alien and hostile. Broken branches littered the forest floor like scattered bones, and the well-marked trail I knew by heart vanished ahead into a wall of impenetrable darkness that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent life. The howl returned, lower this time, resonating through my chest cavity like the subsonic rumble of an approaching earthquake. But this wasn't distance, this was control. Whatever was making that sound was deliberately modulating its voice, like a predator that understood psychological warfare. The sound sent a chill slinking down my spine, pooling in my lower back like ice water. I trained my flashlight beam on the tree line with practiced efficiency, searching for any sign of movement among the swaying pines. Rain pooled in the lantern's protective glass, distorting the beam into wavering, ghost-like shapes that made every shadow seem alive. My ranger training kicked in, scanned methodically, breathed steadily, maintained situational awareness. But the forest seemed to mock my human attempts at control. Every tree trunk could hide a threat. Every shifting shadow might conceal something watching. The familiar had become a maze of potential ambush points. Halfway up the ridge, fighting wind that tried to push me backward with each step, I found them, footprints pressed deep into the rain-softened soil. These weren't the neat pads of any creature in my field guides. They were large, larger than any wolf print I'd ever seen, with claw marks that scored the earth like knife cuts. Each print was perfectly formed despite the downpour, as if whatever had made them possessed enough weight and power to leave permanent impressions in the landscape itself. The prints led off the main trail toward an old fire lookout tower, a skeletal structure that had been abandoned after a lightning strike 5 years ago left it a twisted monument to nature's power. The Forest Service had deemed it too costly to repair and too dangerous to demolish, leaving it to stand as a grim reminder of nature's supremacy. Rusted metal steps climbed the tower's sides like a spine. Somehow impossibly, its platform looked not just intact but almost inviting despite years of neglect. The howl echoed from above, not from the forest floor, but from the tower itself. My hands found the first metal rung before my conscious mind had made the decision to climb. The steel was ice-cold and slick with rain, each step requiring careful placement as wind tried to tear me loose from my precarious hold. 20 feet up, 30, the ground falling away beneath me as I ascended toward whatever was waiting in the darkness above. My lantern swung wildly with each gust, casting erratic shadows that transformed the familiar forest into a writhing mass of potential threats. At the top, something impossible happened. The wind died completely. Not gradually, not naturally, but with the abrupt finality of a door slamming shut. An unnatural calm settled beneath the storm clouds that continued to churn overhead, as if I had climbed into the eye of something far larger than any weather system. I scanned the valley below with growing unease, expecting the familiar vista I'd admired countless times during routine inspections. Instead, I saw only fog, thick, roiling mist that moved with deliberate purpose, slithering through the trees like something alive, something hunting. Then I heard it, low, rhythmic breathing that seemed to come from the fog itself. Not the random exhalations of wind through trees, but the measured inhalations and exhalations of something massive, something that had lungs, something that was very much alive and very close. My own breath caught in my throat, a small sound that seemed to echo in the unnatural stillness. I reached for my radio again with trembling fingers, praying for even a burst of static that would prove the outside world still existed. The device crackled once, emitted a sound like electronic screaming, and died completely. The LED display went dark, leaving me with only my storm lantern against whatever was rising from the valley below. The forest fell into a silence, so complete it felt oppressive. No rain drumming on leaves. No thunder rolling across the peaks. No wind whistling through the tower's metal framework. Only the fog, rolling upward with inexorable purpose, beginning to swallow the world I knew. Then, directly behind me, so close I could feel breath on the back of my neck, came a whisper, a voice that definitely wasn't human, rasping my name with the intimacy of an old friend and the menace of a predator that had been tracking me for years. Ranger. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing on the tower's rain-slick platform, my lantern swinging wide in a desperate arc that threw wild shadows across the metal structure. The light revealed nothing but empty air where that whisper had originated, yet the sensation of being watched, being studied, pressed against me like a physical weight. The fog continued its relentless ascent, tendrils now licking at the tower's base like ghostly fingers testing for weakness. Every instinct screamed at me to climb down immediately, to flee back to the cabin and barricade myself inside until dawn. But Ranger protocol ran deeper than fear. People might be in danger, and I was sworn to protect them, even if it meant walking into something that defied rational explanation. More than that, something primitive in my brain recognized that running from this thing might trigger a chase response I wouldn't survive. I began my descent, each step deliberate and controlled despite the terror clawing at my thoughts. The metal rungs had grown more treacherous in the brief time I'd spent at the top, coated now with a thin film of something that wasn't quite water, something that made my hands slip unless I gripped with painful intensity. Halfway down, my lantern beam caught movement in the fog below, a shadow darker than the surrounding mist, pacing parallel to the tower with fluid, predatory grace. My boots hit solid ground with a squelch that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. The fog had reached waist-deep around me, transforming the familiar forest floor into an alien landscape where every step could lead me over a cliff or into the waiting arms of whatever was hunting me. My lantern's glow created a small sphere of visibility, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, beyond which lay absolute unknown. The creature, I could no longer pretend it was anything natural, began to circle me. I couldn't see it directly, but I could track its movement by the way the fog swirled in its wake, by the soft displacement of leaves and the almost silent padding of enormous paws on wet earth. It was taking its time, studying me, perhaps savoring my fear like a fine wine. I forced myself to move, following the barely visible trail markers deeper into the forest. Each step took me further from civilization, but staying still felt like an invitation to die. My ranger training had covered encounters with every predator native to this region: black bears, the occasional mountain lion, even the rare wolf pack that might wander down from the Canadian wilderness. But this was something else entirely, something that moved with the intelligence of a human, and the silent lethality of an apex predator evolved beyond anything in my field guides. The fog began to thin as I climbed higher, revealing glimpses of the forest around me in my lantern's guttering light. Why, saw made my blood freeze. Trees that I'd known for years, ancient pines that had stood like sentinels through countless seasons, now bore fresh scars. Claw marks scored their bark in parallel lines, too high and too deep for any natural animal. Some marks were recent, sap still weeping from the wounds like blood from fresh cuts. Others were older, weathered by seasons of rain and snow, suggesting this thing had been here for years, marking its territory with the patience of something that viewed time differently than humans did. I found the first remnant of camping gear wedged between two fallen logs, a torn piece of nylon in Forest Service green that made my stomach drop. It was from a ranger's rain jacket, identical to the one I wore. The fabric was shredded with surgical precision, each tear suggesting claws that could slice through modern synthetic materials like tissue paper. No blood, which somehow made it worse. Whatever had happened to the jacket's owner, it hadn't been quick. My radio crackled back to life without warning, startling me so badly I nearly dropped my lantern. Through waves of static came a voice, human, desperate, calling my name. Base to Ridge Patrol. Come in, emergency situation. I fumbled for the handset, my fingers numb with cold and fear. This is Ridge Patrol. Go ahead, base. 3 missing hikers. Last seen heading toward Fire Tower. Immediate assistance. The transmission dissolved into electronic chaos, leaving me alone with a new horror. Other people were out here. Other people were wandering through this nightmare, unaware that something ancient and hungry was stalking through their world. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Whatever this creature was, whatever it wanted, I was the only thing standing between it and innocent victims. I began to move faster, following the torn landscape of claw marks and displaced earth that formed a trail of devastation leading deeper into the forest heart. My lantern beam caught more evidence with each step, a shredded backpack hanging from a pine branch 20 feet above ground, scraps of bright outdoor clothing scattered like confetti, a single hiking boot with its laces cut so cleanly they might have been severed by a razor. But no bodies. No blood. Just the systematic collection of human artifacts, as if something was studying us, learning about us, preparing for something larger. The howl erupted from directly ahead, so close and so powerful that it knocked me backward a full step. This wasn't the distant call I'd heard from the cabin. This was a challenge, a declaration of territory, a sound that said I had finally wandered close enough to whatever lair this creature had claimed. The fog swirled away from the sound source, revealing a clearing I'd never seen before despite years of patrolling these trails. In the center stood something that had once been a ranger station, built in the same log cabin style as my own patrol base. But this structure had been modified. The walls bore the same parallel claw marks I'd seen on the trees, but these cuts went deeper, revealing the raw wood beneath like exposed bone. The windows had been systematically destroyed, not shattered but carefully removed, as if something wanted unrestricted access to both interior and exterior. Most disturbing of all, the roof had been partially torn away in a pattern that suggested incredible strength applied with frightening precision. My lantern beam revealed movement within the ruined structure. Not the quick scurrying of small animals seeking shelter, but the deliberate motion of something large, something that belonged there, something that had made this place its own. I could hear breathing now, deep, rhythmic inhalations that seemed to draw the very air from my lungs. Whatever was inside knew I was here. It was waiting for me to make the next move. Behind me, barely audible over my own thundering heartbeat, came the soft whisper of displaced leaves. I turned to find my retreat cut off. The fog had closed in again, but this time it wasn't empty. Shapes moved within it, large, predatory silhouettes that suggested this thing wasn't hunting alone. I was surrounded, trapped between a modified cabin and whatever pack had been trailing me through the forest. My training told me to make myself large, to shout, to use my lantern as a weapon if necessary. But some deeper instinct, some primitive understanding that existed below conscious thought, whispered that traditional tactics wouldn't work here. This wasn't a normal predator responding to normal stimuli. This was something that understood humans well enough to anticipate our responses, something that had been studying us with the patience of a species that measured time in centuries rather than decades. The breathing from the cabin stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something infinitely worse, the soft padding of massive paws on wooden floor, moving with the deliberate slowness of absolute confidence. Whatever lived in that ruined station was coming outside to meet me. After years of patience, years of observation, it had decided the time for hiding was over. My lantern flickered once, twice, and began to dim. The battery, which should have lasted another 6 hours, was failing just when I needed it most. The circle of light around me contracted, step by step, bringing the darkness closer with each passing second. From the cabin's doorway came a new sound, not a howl this time, but something far more terrifying. It was laughter, deep, resonant, and absolutely inhuman, yet structured enough to suggest intelligence, humor, perhaps even anticipation. Whatever was about to emerge from that ruined building was genuinely amused by my predicament. The fog swirled away from the doorway like curtains being drawn, and in my dying lantern light, I finally saw what had been hunting me through the storm. What emerged from the cabin's darkness defied every category my rational mind tried to impose upon it. It moved upright like a human, but its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too broad, limbs that bent at angles that spoke of joints evolved for purposes I couldn't fathom. Matted fur covered its form, not the neat coat of any known predator, but something that seemed to absorb light, making it difficult to focus on the creature's exact outline. The fur moved independently of any wind, rippling with its own current, as if alive with parasitic energy. But it was the eyes that broke something fundamental in my understanding of the world. They weren't the simple animal gaze of a predator. They burned with an intelligence that was ancient, calculating, and utterly alien. These eyes had watched the forest change across decades, had observed generations of humans stumble through their domain, had learned our patterns and weaknesses with the patience of something that existed outside normal time. They held not just hunger, but curiosity, as if I were a specimen finally ready for close examination. The creature's arms hung nearly to the ground, ending in hands that were part human, part claw. Elongated fingers tipped with what looked like obsidian knives, each one capable of the surgical precision I'd seen carved into trees and camping gear. When it took its first step toward me, the earth seemed to accept its weight differently than it should, as if the ground itself recognized this thing as belonging here in a way that I never could. My dying lantern cast erratic shadows across its face, or what might have been a face. The features shifted in the uncertain light, sometimes appearing almost human, other times revealing something that belonged in nightmares. A mouth that was too wide, filled with teeth that were too sharp, arranged in patterns that suggested this creature's dietary needs went far beyond simple predation. This thing didn't just kill for food, it killed for purposes I couldn't comprehend. "You've been watching me," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded in the face of absolute terror. It seemed important to establish that I understood this wasn't a random encounter, that whatever was happening here had been orchestrated over time. The creature tilted its head with fluid grace, a gesture that was almost human in its curiosity. When it spoke, its voice was my own, not similar, not mimicked, but perfectly reproduced as if it had been listening to me, studying my speech patterns, learning to become me. "Ranger," it said in my exact tone, with my precise accent. "Such dedication. 3 seasons you've walked these trails. 3 seasons I've watched you care for this place, protect the weak ones who stumble through my domain." The words hit me like physical blows. 3 seasons, exactly how long I'd been assigned to this sector. This thing had been observing me since my first day, cataloging my routines, my responses, perhaps even my fears. The missing hikers, the torn equipment, the systematic destruction, it had all been preparation for this moment. "What do you want?" The question emerged without conscious thought, driven by a desperate need to understand, to find some logic in this nightmare that might suggest survival was possible. The creature's laugh was my own laughter, but twisted into something that suggested humor concepts I couldn't grasp. "Want," it repeated, tasting the word. "I want what I have always wanted. To understand. You humans fascinate me, so fragile, yet you venture into places like this. So afraid, yet you continue forward when every instinct screams at you to flee." It took another step closer, and I could smell it now. Not the musk of a wild animal, but something else entirely. Ozone and copper, like the air before a lightning strike mixed with a metallic tang of blood. But underlying that was something worse, the scent of deep places, of caves that had never seen sunlight, of earth that had been turned over to reveal what was buried beneath. The others, I forced myself to ask. The missing hikers. What happened to them? They serve their purpose, the creature replied, still using my voice, making each word in violation. They help me learn about fear, about hope, about the precise moment when understanding arrives. My lantern flickered again, the light now barely extending beyond my own feet. In the growing darkness, I could sense rather than see the other shapes that had been circling us, moving closer now that their leader had revealed itself. Not a pack in any traditional sense, but something else, extensions of this central intelligence, perhaps, or different aspects of the same impossible entity. Fight or flight? The choice that had driven survival for millions of years crystallized in my mind. But this wasn't a normal predator-prey scenario. Running would trigger a chase I couldn't win. Fighting seemed equally hopeless against something that had been planning this encounter for years. But there was a third option, one that my training had touched on but never fully explored. When facing an intelligent threat, sometimes the only weapon is intelligence itself. "You've been studying us," I said, forcing authority into my voice despite the terror clawing at my thoughts. "But you don't understand us completely, or you wouldn't need to keep taking people." The creature paused, its head tilting further in a gesture that was becoming disturbingly familiar. For a moment, something flickered across its features, uncertainty, perhaps, or genuine curiosity about where this conversation might lead. "Explain." That single word, spoken in my own voice, carried more weight than any threat. This thing wanted to learn, which meant it might be willing to listen. Which meant I might have found the only leverage available in this impossible situation. "Fear," I said, my mind racing through everything I knew about predator psychology, animal behavior, human nature. "You think fear is our weakness. But you're wrong. Fear is what makes us dangerous." I reached slowly for my emergency flare, standard ranger equipment that I'd never imagined using as a weapon. The creature watched with apparent fascination as I pulled the red cylinder from my belt, made no move to stop me as I gripped the activation tab. "Humans don't just run when we're afraid," I continued, holding the flare like a talisman against the darkness. "We adapt. We learn. We find ways to fight things that should be impossible to fight." The creature's eyes, my eyes, somehow narrowed slightly. For the first time since it had emerged from the cabin, it seemed genuinely uncertain about my next move. "And right now," I said, pulling the flare's activation tab in one smooth motion, "I'm more afraid than I've ever been in my life." The flare ignited with a brilliant red explosion of light that turned the fog-shrouded clearing into a hellscape of shadows and impossible geometries. The creature recoiled, not from pain but from surprise. It hadn't expected me to willingly sacrifice my night vision, hadn't anticipated that I might choose temporary blindness over the gradual failure of my dying lantern. In that moment of disorientation, I moved. Not away from the creature, but toward it, the burning flare held like a torch, banking everything on the hope that something ancient and intelligent might respect courage more than it valued an easy kill. The creature's roar split the night, not my voice this time, but its own, a sound that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. But it stepped backward, giving ground for the first time in our encounter. "Interesting," it said, and for a moment its voice carried notes I'd never heard in my own speech, harmonics that suggested something vast and old and utterly inhuman. "Very interesting indeed. I left Hemlock Ridge at dawn, battered and half-mad, stumbling down trails that looked nothing like the paths I'd climbed the night before. My fellow rangers found me collapsed at the park entrance 12 hours later, eyes wild with visions I couldn't adequately describe, my gear torn and scattered as if I'd fought my way through a war zone. The emergency flare had burned out hours earlier, leaving me to navigate by starlight and pure determination through a forest that seemed to shift and change around me with each step. Most dismissed my story as storm delirium, the psychological break that sometimes occurs when isolation meets extreme weather and exhaustion. The official report filed by my supervisor listed my experience as weather-related stress incident with possible hypothermic hallucinations. I was placed on medical leave for 2 weeks and required to undergo psychological evaluation before returning to duty. But then they found the evidence. The claw marks on the fire lookout tower were real, scored deep into metal that would have required industrial equipment to damage. The modified ranger station I described was located exactly where my fractured account placed it, its roof torn away with precision that defied explanation, its walls bearing the same parallel scars I tried to describe in my incident report. Most disturbing of all, they found items, fragments of camping gear, pieces of clothing, a ranger's badge from someone who'd been reported missing 3 years earlier. I still patrol Hemlock Ridge. The Forest Service refused my request for transfer, claiming that my intimate knowledge of local conditions made me irreplaceable in this sector. What they don't understand, why I can never tell them, is that the creature and I reached an understanding that night in the flare's dying light. Not friendship, nothing so human as that, but a recognition of mutual respect between two species that had learned something important about each other. I still hear that howl in my dreams, an echo from the heart of the forest that calls to something primal in my DNA. But now I understand what it's really saying, not a threat, but an acknowledgement. A recognition that some boundaries have been negotiated, some territories defined through trial and terror. The missing hikers were never found. Officially, they remain listed as lost to weather and terrain, victims of poor planning and worse luck. I know better. They serve their purpose in helping something ancient understand the creatures that had begun encroaching on its domain. Their sacrifice purchased a kind of peace, a treaty written in fear and sealed with survival. If you ever find yourself patrolling a dark forest during a storm, if you hear sounds that don't match any animal in your field guides, if you feel eyes watching from shadows that seem too deep, heed this warning. Trust your training, but trust your instincts more. Guard your fear like a weapon, because sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and something that views humans as specimens in a study that's been ongoing for longer than our species has kept records. And pray you're never the one chosen to teach them something new. Some nights, when the wind is right and the moon is dark, I still hear my own voice calling from the depths of Hemlock Ridge. Not my voice as it is now, but as it was that night, filled with terror and determination, carrying words I spoke in a moment when courage and madness became indistinguishable. The creature learned more than predator psychology from our encounter. It learned to be human in ways that should terrify anyone who understands the implications. The forest keeps its secrets, but sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear them learning to keep ours as well. If this tale sent chills down your spine, if you've ever felt something watching from tree leans that seemed too dark, too deep, too knowing, share your own encounters with the things that hunt in wild places. The comments section below has become something of a confessional for those who've walked similar paths, who've returned from dark forests with stories that don't fit in official reports. I leaned closer, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name, eyes scanning the carvings that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. They were ancient, far older than the ranger station, older than any human settlement in this region. Symbols twisted in patterns too intricate to decipher, too perfect to be natural erosion. Behind me, the wind rushed with sudden violence, carrying an unseen presence closer. The temperature plummeted, and my flashlight beam wavered as if something passed between me and the rock face. I stepped back, hand fumbling for my radio with numb fingers. Dispatch, do you copy? I need. Static erupted from the device, harsh and grating, then cut to silence so complete it felt like going deaf. Then the voice returned, no longer distant but intimate, as if lips pressed against my ear. Leave, now. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the canyon rim, illuminating the narrow gorge in stark black and white. For that split second, the walls seemed to close in, grooves shifting like living tissue, breathing with malevolent intent. The runes pulsed brighter, and I realized with a cold, sickening certainty that crawled up my spine like ice water. This canyon didn't want me here, but it wasn't going to let me leave. I stepped off the overlook into the narrow throat of Windfall Canyon, each footfall echoing with unnatural resonance. The sandstone walls rose on either side like silent sentinels, their surfaces scarred by millennia of wind and water, but now they seemed to watch me with ancient eyes. My radio crackled once, a desperate burst of static, then died completely, as though the canyon itself had reached out and crushed the signal in its stone fist. Above, the clouds churned in bruised hues of purple and black, blocking out the last traces of daylight. The storm was moving faster than weather reports had predicted, or perhaps time moved differently here, stretched and warped by forces I couldn't comprehend. A cold wind carried those whispered syllables down from the heights, indecipherable but urgent, like warnings shouted in a dying language. My boots crunched on sand and loose pebbles as I followed the worn footpath deeper into the canyon's throat. With each step, the walls seemed to lean inward, creating the illusion, or perhaps the reality, that the passage was slowly strangling itself around me. The path narrowed to a tight corridor, carved by centuries of flash floods that had carved these arteries through living rock. The walls here bore faint carvings everywhere I looked, runes similar to those at the Overlook but more elaborate, more insistent, etched in swirling patterns that hurt to follow with my eyes. And remember, the most dangerous predators are the ones intelligent enough to let some prey escape. After all, someone has to carry the story back to warn the others. Total story, substantially expanded while maintaining original structure and characters. They say the wind carries secrets through Windfall Canyon, but I never believed it until one night I heard the walls themselves whisper my fate. The afternoon began like any other patrol, charting visitor logs, inspecting campsites, and ensuring the canyon's trails were clear. I'd walked these paths for 3 years, knew every switchback and loose rock by heart. The routine had become as familiar as breathing. Clipboard tucked under my arm, radio crackling with dispatch updates, boots finding their rhythm on sun-baked earth. But today felt different. The air hung heavy with anticipation, thick as honey in my lungs. By dusk, storm clouds gathered like bruised knuckles against the horizon, painting the sandstone walls in ominous shades of crimson. The familiar amber glow of sunset twisted into something darker, more primal. A chill swept through the canyon, unusual for this time of year, carrying a low hum that seemed to vibrate through my bones, settling deep in my chest like a second heartbeat. I stood on the overlook, straps on my pack heavy with flashlights and emergency gear, breathing in the damp air that tasted of copper and ozone. The storm was still miles away, yet electricity seemed to dance along my skin. That's when I heard it. Soft at first, rhythmic, like someone reciting a lullaby in a language that felt ancient, forgotten. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, wrapping around me like invisible arms, pulling me closer to the edge. My rational mind cataloged possibilities, wind through rock formations, settling stone, even hikers somewhere below. But my gut knew better. This wasn't natural. I trained my flashlight on the path below, the beam cutting through gathering shadows. Empty. The trail stretched out like a pale scar against dark stone, unmarked by footprints or signs of life. The hum rose, shifting into distinct syllables that seemed to form words just beyond my comprehension. The hair on my arms stood on end as the temperature dropped another degree, and my breath began to mist in the suddenly frigid air. Growing louder now, the voices, plural, I realized with a start, even though no one was there. My heart pounded against my ribs like a caged bird as the light beam caught something that made my blood freeze, a glint on the sandstone, like runes etched deep into the rock, glowing with a faint phosphorescence that pulsed in rhythm with the whispers. The voices turned urgent, overlapping now, some pleading, others commanding. The words remained incomprehensible, but their meaning seeped into my consciousness like poison through skin. They wanted something. They wanted me. I ran my gloved hand over one symbol, feeling grooves worn smooth by countless years. The stone was warm to the touch, almost feverish, as if blood flowed just beneath its surface. The moment my fingers made contact, the whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of voices that seemed to speak directly into my bones. I jerked my hand back, but the warmth lingered on my palm like a brand. The wind lifted a sudden swirl of dust, and I coughed, stumbling backward. The taste in my mouth was wrong, metallic and bitter, like old coins or dried blood. Sunlight pierced through a narrow gap far above, a golden lance that illuminated a faint ribbon of moss clinging impossibly to the rock face. The green was shockingly out of place in this arid landscape, vibrant and alive in a way that seemed almost obscene against the ancient stone. It pulsed gently, as if breathing, and I wondered what fed it in this lifeless place. I aimed my flashlight upward, following the moss's trail. The walls soared beyond my light's reach, disappearing into blackness that felt solid, oppressive. Somewhere up there, the whispers originated, floating down like invisible snow. They had taken on a rhythm now, almost musical. Go, return, rest, belong. Each word settled in my chest like a weight, making it harder to breathe. Everyone always says the desert is quiet, but here the canyon had found its voice, and it was singing me deeper. A sudden sharp crack echoed off the walls, the sound of stone giving way high above. I looked up just as pebbles began to rain down, striking my shoulders and helmet with tiny impacts that felt like warning taps. One larger stone, the size of my fist, crashed into the sand inches from my boots. I froze, breath coming in shallow gasps, waiting for the avalanche that never came. But the canyon had made its point. At the narrowest section, the path contracted to a gap barely wide enough for my shoulders. The walls pressed in from both sides, their surfaces slick with moisture that had no source. I crouched to pass through, and my knee struck a loose stone that tumbled down into an unseen chasm. The sound of its fall seemed to go on forever, echoing and re-echoing, until it became a mournful wail that scraped along my nerves like fingernails on glass. Heart hammering against my ribs, I straightened and pressed forward through the constriction. My flashlight beam flickered, once, twice, and in those moments of darkness, I felt a presence behind me, heavy and patient and utterly inhuman. The air grew thick, pressing against my back like invisible hands. The whispers had grown frantic now, overlapping voices creating a symphony of desperation, some pleading for release, others angry beyond words, all of them focused on me with laser intensity. I rounded a sharp bend and gasped, the sound torn from my throat by wonder and terror. The canyon walls opened dramatically into a circular chamber, a natural amphitheater carved from living rock. The space was vast, easily 100 feet across, with walls that curved upward into shadowy heights. But it was what occupied the center that stopped me cold. An ancient stone pedestal rose from the sand like an altar, its surface covered in carvings that seemed to move in my peripheral vision. The symbols circled its base in tight spirals, growing more complex as they ascended. Moss and lichen modeled its surface in patterns that reminded me uncomfortably of dried blood. The whispers had fallen to a murmur now, expectant and hungry. On top of the pedestal lay a single obsidian shard, no larger than my thumb but perfect in its darkness. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void in the world that hurt to look at directly. Even from 20 feet away, I could feel its pull, not physical, but something deeper, something that reached into the most primitive parts of my brain and whispered promises I couldn't quite hear. Curiosity warred with every survival instinct I possessed. Logic screamed at me to turn around, to run, to get as far from this place as possible. But my feet carried me forward, each step echoing unnaturally in the chamber's acoustics. The whispers held their breath, as if the entire canyon was waiting to see what I would do. The sand here was different, finer, almost powder-soft, and it clung to my boots with each step. Strange shapes lay half-buried in the drifts around the pedestal, fragments of bone bleached white by age, scraps of fabric that crumbled at the slightest touch, metal objects corroded beyond recognition. I tried not to think about what they might represent, but my imagination painted vivid pictures anyway. Reaching the pedestal's base, I looked up at the obsidian shard. This close, I could see my reflection in its surface, distorted, multiplied, as if I were looking into a black mirror that showed not one future but many. My hand rose of its own accord, fingers extended toward the artifact. The moment my skin made contact with the shard's cool edge, the world exploded. A jolt of energy shot up my arm like lightning, but cold instead of hot, carrying with it a flood of disembodied voices that crashed into my consciousness like a breaking wave. Images flashed behind my eyes with stroboscopic intensity, the ceremonial rite conducted by firelight, hooded figures chanting in that same ancient language, the obsidian blade cutting into willing flesh while blood dripped onto hungry stone. Pain beyond description. Terror and ecstasy intertwined. The sacrifice willingly given to feed the canyon's endless hunger. And underneath it all, a presence vast and alien and utterly without mercy, something that had slumbered in these rocks since before humans walked upright, something that the ancient people had discovered and tried to appease with offerings of blood and bone and soul. I yanked my hand back, but the connection lingered, threads of alien thoughts still worming through my mind. The shaft of my flashlight flickered and died with a sound like breaking glass, plunging me into absolute darkness. The whispers roared back to life. Stay, belong, feed us, free us. My own breathing thundered in my ears, each exhalation a desperate gasp. The walls around me pulsed with a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat, as if the chamber itself was alive, digesting me slowly. I fumbled for my radio with hands that shook like leaves. Nothing but static. Then, impossibly, my own voice emerged from the speaker, distant and hollow. "Dispatch? I'm trapped. Tell my sister I—" The transmission cut off, but I knew I hadn't spoken those words. Not yet. But I would, sometime in a future that felt increasingly inevitable. Panic rose in my throat like bile. I stumbled backward from the pedestal, desperate to escape the pull of that terrible shard, but my sense of direction had abandoned me completely. The chamber seemed larger now, the walls receding into an impossibility of space. Sand shifted underfoot with each step, creating new patterns that confused my eyes and led me in circles. The whispers had become a choir now, guiding me low and coaxing and utterly seductive. Part of me wanted to listen, wanted to surrender to their promises of belonging and purpose. The rational part of my mind wrestled with this alien compulsion, recognizing it as the first stage of whatever had claimed the others who had left their bones in this place. A sudden flash illuminated the chamber, not lightning, but something else, something internal to the canyon itself. In that brief moment of phosphorescent light, I saw the true scope of the place, walls that stretched up beyond sight, covered in layer upon layer of carvings, and scattered throughout the sand, the remnants of dozens of previous visitors. People who had come here over the years, drawn by curiosity or accident, and never left. The light also revealed something else, a narrow fissure in the chamber wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It was partially hidden behind a curtain of that strange, glowing moss, but it was there. An exit? Maybe. I ran toward it, lungs burning with the effort, legs pumping through sand that seemed to grab at my boots with every step. Behind me, the whispers rose to a shriek of fury, and I felt the temperature drop so suddenly that frost began to form on my jacket. Something was following me, not footsteps, but a presence that moved through stone itself, hunting. Clawing against the rough sandstone, I squeezed through the fissure, feeling the walls scrape against my shoulders and back. The passage was tight, almost too narrow, and for a terrifying moment I thought I might become wedged there forever. But desperation gave me strength, and I pushed through until the walls suddenly opened once more. I found myself in another passage, this one sloping upward toward what looked like natural light. The whispers echoed behind me, fainter now, but still audible, like the memory of scream. I didn't stop running until I could see stars overhead and feel clean desert air filling my lungs. Only then did I collapse on a patch of sand outside the canyon proper, chest heaving, every muscle in my body trembling with exhaustion and residual terror. Above me, the storm clouds were breaking apart, revealing a carpet of stars that seemed impossibly bright after the darkness below. But even as I caught my breath, I could feel the canyon's attention on me, patient and eternal. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The fissure I had escaped through led not to freedom, but to another level of the canyon's maze. As my eyes adjusted to the dim starlight filtering down from above, I realized I stood at the edge of what appeared to be a natural staircase, stone steps worn smooth by age, descending into depths that my flashlight's dying beam couldn't penetrate. The whispers had followed me here, softer now but more insistent, like a tide that had found a crack in my defenses and was slowly seeping through. My hand shook as I fumbled for the backup flashlight in my pack. The beam that emerged was stronger, casting harsh shadows that danced with each tremor of my grip. The steps before me were carved with the same runic patterns I had seen throughout the canyon, but these were different, older, more complex, as if whoever had made them had been trying to capture something too vast for simple symbols. I knew I should climb up, find my way to the canyon rim and safety. Every rational thought screamed at me to get as far from this place as possible. But the compulsion that had started when I touched the obsidian shard was growing stronger, not weaker. It felt like invisible hooks had been set deep in my mind, and now something was reeling me in with infinite patience. The descent began almost without my conscious decision. One moment I was standing at the top of the stairs. The next I was picking my way down ancient steps that had been worn to perfect smoothness by countless feet over countless years. Each step down felt like a small surrender, another thread in the web that was slowly but surely trapping me. The walls here were different from the upper canyon, smoother, almost polished, and covered with a patina that seemed to shift and flow in my peripheral vision. Strange formations jutted from the stone, twisted spires and impossible arches that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in too many dimensions at once. The whispers had found harmony here, creating a low, thrumming song that seemed to resonate in my bones. After what felt like hours but could have been minutes, time had become elastic in this place. The stairs opened into another chamber. This one was larger than the amphitheater above, its ceiling lost in shadows that seemed to move with purpose. But it was the pool at its center that took my breath away. The subterranean pool stretched across most of the chamber floor, its surface reflecting my flashlight beam like black glass. But the reflection was wrong. Instead of showing the rocky ceiling above, the water's surface displayed images that flickered and changed, scenes of the canyon in different eras, different seasons, different centuries. I saw Native Americans performing rituals around fires that cast no heat, Spanish explorers who never made a home, modern hikers who had simply vanished from the trails above. And in every scene, the obsidian shard was there, calling to them as it had called to me. The pool's edges were lined with skeletal remains arranged in precise circles, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They sat upright, facing the water, their empty sockets fixed on reflections that showed their final moments over and over again. Some wore the remnants of modern clothing. Others were draped in ancient textiles that should have crumbled to dust centuries ago. All of them had their hands extended toward the pool, as if reaching for something just beneath the surface. As I stared at this macabre congregation, a sharp pain lanced through my chest. Not physical pain, but something deeper, an ache that felt like homesickness for a place I'd never been. The canyon was implanting something in me, changing my very neurons to make me want to stay, to join this eternal assembly of the lost. The whispers were coming from them now, I realized. Each skeleton was a voice in the choir, singing praises to whatever dwelt in the pool's depths. They had found what they were looking for, had been granted the belonging they sought. All it had cost them was everything they used to be. I backed away from the pool's edge, fighting against a compulsion that urged me to kneel beside the nearest skeleton and add my voice to their endless song. But movement in the water caught my eye, and despite every instinct screaming at me to look away, I found myself drawn to the pool's surface once more. Something was rising from the depths, not breaking the surface, but approaching it from below. A shadow within shadows, vast and patient, ancient beyond measure. As it neared the surface, the reflections of the water changed, showing not the past but possible futures. Myself kneeling beside the pool, my eyes rolled back in ecstasy as something flowed into me from the dark water. Myself walking back up those stone steps, but wrong somehow, moving with inhuman grace, my mouth forming words in that ancient language, myself standing on the canyon rim at sunset, drawing other hikers down with whispered promises and a smile that belonged to something else entirely. The pain in my chest intensified, spreading outward like the roots of some alien plant taking hold in my heart. I could feel my memories being examined, cataloged, prepared for harvesting. This place didn't just want my body. It wanted my entire existence, my experiences, my connections to the world above. It would wear me like a mask, use my face and voice to lure others down into its hungry depths. The comparison to sirens wasn't lost on me, those mythical creatures who sang sailors to their doom on rocky shores. But this was older than those stories, the template from which such legends were born. This canyon had been singing its lethal song since before humans had words for the terror it inspired. Childhood memories surfaced unbidden, the paralyzing fear I'd felt as a 10-year-old during a family trip to Carlsbad Caverns, the way the darkness beneath the earth had seemed alive and malevolent, reaching up to drag me down into its depths. I had clung to my father's hand, refusing to let go, earning teasing from my older sister about being a scaredy cat. But children's fears are often wiser than adult rationality. Some part of me had recognized the wrongness even then, the sense that certain places were never meant for human feet. This pool was 1,000 times worse than any cave I'd ever imagined. It pulsed with malevolent intelligence, and I could feel that intelligence studying me, learning my fears and desires with inhuman patience. Soon it would know exactly how to break me, exactly what promises to whisper in my ear to make me walk willingly into those dark waters. I forced myself to turn away from the pool, but the chamber offered no easy escape. 3 passages led away from the central space, each one glowing with a faint bioluminescent light that came from some form of fungi growing on the walls. The growths pulsed in rhythm with the whispers, creating a hypnotic pattern that was almost impossible to ignore. The leftmost passage sloped upward, possibly back toward the surface, but something about its angle felt wrong, as if it curved back on itself in impossible ways. The right passage descended further into the earth, and even from here I could feel the greater darkness that lay beyond, something that made this chamber seem bright and welcoming by comparison. The center passage ran level, disappearing into phosphorescent gloom that hurt to look at directly. I chose the left passage, hoping against hope that it would lead back to the world above. But as I entered the tunnel, the walls began to close in around me, narrowing with each step until I was forced to crawl on hands and knees through passages barely wide enough for my shoulders. The bioluminescent fungi here were different, more active, reaching out with thread-like tendrils that brushed against my face and hands with touches that felt disturbingly like caresses. The whispers followed me into the tunnel, but they were changing now, becoming more personal, more specific. They spoke of my sister waiting for news that would never come, of search parties that would find only my empty truck at the trailhead, of the questions that would never be answered. They painted pictures of grief and confusion, of a family destroyed by uncertainty. But they also offered alternatives. Join us, they said, and you can visit her in dreams. Become part of the canyon song, and your voice will call to others, bringing them the same peace you found. Feed the ancient hunger, and in return, become part of something eternal and vast and utterly without the petty concerns that plague human existence. The temptation was almost overwhelming. The pain in my chest had become a constant ache now, like a fishhook embedded deep in my heart, and with each beat it pulled me a little further from my own humanity. Part of me wanted to give in, to stop fighting, and let whatever was happening to me run its course. At least then the struggle would be over. But another part of me, smaller but stubborn, remembered the morning sun on my face during routine patrols, the satisfaction of helping lost hikers find their way back to safety, the way my sister's kids always ran to hug me when I visited. Human things, small things, but they were mine, and I wasn't ready to let them go. The passage finally began to widen, and I emerged into another chamber, smaller than the pool room but no less disturbing. The walls here were covered with more of the bioluminescent fungi, but these had grown into recognizable shapes, human figures dancing in eternal celebration, their arms raised in worship of something too vast to comprehend. As I watched, the shapes began to move, performing their ancient ritual with slow, hypnotic grace. But it was the shadows that truly terrified me. Cast by the fungal light against the chamber's ceiling, they formed shapes that should have been impossible, towering figures with too many arms, vast geometric patterns that seemed to exist in folded space, symbols that burned themselves into my retinas and refused to fade. As I watched, transfixed, the shadows began to take on three-dimensional form, detaching themselves from the ceiling and floating down toward me with predatory intent. The whispers rose to a crescendo of triumph, and I realized with crystalline clarity that this had all been planned from the moment I first heard the canyon's voice. Every choice I had made, every turn I had taken, had been subtly guided to bring me to this exact point. I was not an explorer or a victim. I was a harvest, ripe and ready for reaping. The shadow figures surrounded me now, their chanting voices weaving patterns in the air that made reality itself seem to bend and twist. One of them reached out with fingers made of living darkness, and I felt the first gentle touch of something that wanted to strip away everything I had ever been and replace it with something older, hungrier, and utterly alien to human experience. That touch was like ice water in my veins, shocking me back to myself just long enough to remember the emergency flare tucked in my jacket pocket, a last resort for signaling rescue teams in case of injury or disaster. My numb fingers found the flare's cap and twisted it free with desperate strength. The brilliant red light that erupted from the flare was like a scream made visible, so bright in the phosphorescent gloom that it seemed to burn the air itself. The shadow figures recoiled with sounds like tearing fabric, their forms dissolving back into the mundane shadows they should have been. The fungal dancers froze mid-gesture, and for a moment, the whispers fell completely silent. In that silence, I heard something else, the distant sound of wind moving through natural passages, carrying with it the scent of sage and clean desert air. Somewhere above me, the real world still existed, still waited for my return. The flare's light wouldn't last long, but it had bought me precious seconds of clarity. I stumbled toward the sound of wind, following air currents that had to lead somewhere, following the promise of escape that sang in my blood louder than any ancient compulsion. Behind me, the whispers began again, furious now, betrayed. The canyon had been so close to claiming another voice for its eternal choir, and I had snatched myself away at the last possible moment. But I could feel its attention following me, patient and implacable. It had waited for millennia. It could wait a little longer. The passage I chose was narrow and twisted, forcing me to squeeze through gaps that scraped skin from my shoulders and tore my uniform. But the air grew fresher with each desperate breath, and finally, impossibly, I saw a glimmer of natural light ahead. I emerged from a crack in the canyon wall just as dawn was breaking over the eastern rim, painting the sandstone in shades of gold and rose that seemed impossibly pure after the phosphorescent nightmares below. The familiar landscape of Windfall Canyon spread out before me, unchanged and eternal, giving no hint of the horrors that lay beneath its serene surface. But I could still feel the obsidian shard calling to me from the depths, its dark song echoing in my bones. And I knew with sick certainty that this was far from over. The morning sun should have felt like salvation, but as I sat on a boulder outside the hidden entrance to the canyon's underworld, I realized that something fundamental had changed within me. The obsidian shard was still down there, still pulsing with alien hunger, and part of me, a part that grew stronger with each passing moment, wanted to go back and claim it. I forced myself to stand, to walk away from the crack in the canyon wall, but each step felt like I was fighting against invisible chains. The whispers had faded but not disappeared. They murmured at the edge of my consciousness like a radio station just out of tune, promising completion, belonging purpose beyond the mundane concerns of human existence. My radio crackled to life as I reached the main trail, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. The familiar voice of dispatch filled the static. "Ranger Patterson, please respond. Your shift ended hours ago." "We've been." "I'm here." I managed, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Had some equipment issues. Heading back to base now." "Copy that. Everything okay out there?" I opened my mouth to tell her about the chambers, the pool, the shadow figures that had tried to steal my soul. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I heard myself saying, "All clear. Just routine maintenance checks." The light came so easily it terrified me. Some part of the canyon had already taken root in my mind, editing my responses, protecting its secrets. I was becoming its unconscious guardian, just as others had before me. The walk back to the ranger station felt surreal, like moving through a dream where everything looked familiar but felt fundamentally wrong. Other hikers passed me on the trail, an elderly couple with matching sun hats, a group of college students with too much gear and not enough water, and I found myself studying their faces with disturbing intensity. Would they hear the canyon's call? Were any of them potential offerings for the hungry darkness below? The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it felt almost protective, as if I was evaluating their worthiness, their spiritual readiness for transcendence. I shook my head violently, trying to dislodge such alien thoughts, but they clung like spider webs. The canyon had planted seeds in my consciousness, and they were already beginning to sprout. Back at the station, I filed my report with mechanical precision, documenting nothing more suspicious than loose rocks and flash flood potential. My supervisor, Janet, barely looked up from her own paperwork. It was just another routine patrol in a landscape that had been mapped and cataloged and declared safe for public recreation. If only she knew what lay beneath her careful classifications. That night, I dreamed of the pool and its circle of willing dead. But in the dream, I wasn't fleeing. I was walking slowly toward the water's edge, my movements graceful and purposeful. The skeletal figures turned to welcome me with jaw-dropping grins, and I felt such overwhelming joy at finally coming home that I woke with tears on my cheeks. The next few days passed in a blur of normal activities that felt increasingly hollow. I conducted tours, updated trail maps, answered tourists' questions about local geology with rote responses that revealed nothing of the true forces shaping this landscape. But underneath the routine, the whispers grew stronger. They came at odd moments. While I was eating lunch, suddenly the sandwich in my mouth tasted like dust, and I could hear voices calling my name from the depths. During a staff meeting, Janet's words about visitor safety protocols became background noise to a more compelling discussion about ancient rituals and willing sacrifice. At night, I would lie awake listening to wind through my apartment windows and swear I could hear the canyon singing lullabies about belonging and purpose. On the fourth night, I gave up pretending to resist. The canyon waited for me like a patient lover, its walls glowing softly with bioluminescent welcome. I made my way down the familiar passages without hesitation, following pathways that felt more like home than anywhere I had ever lived. The whispers guided me with gentle enthusiasm, praising my wisdom, my courage, my spiritual readiness for transformation. The pool chamber was exactly as I had left it, except now the skeletal congregation seemed to nod approval as I approached. Their empty sockets tracked my movement with interest rather than hunger. I was no longer prey, but a willing participant in something grand and eternal. The obsidian shard lay on its pedestal where I had left it, but now I understood its true purpose. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a key, a catalyst, a bridge between the mundane world above and the transcendent reality below. All I had to do was pick it up and let it complete the transformation that had already begun. But as my hand reached toward the shard, a different voice cut through the whispers, not ancient or alien, but heartbreakingly human. My sister's voice, calling my name the way she had when we were children, and she was trying to wake me from nightmares. The memory hit me like cold water. Sarah at my bedside after our parents died, holding my hand while I cried myself to sleep. Sarah helping me fill out job applications when I couldn't afford college. Sarah's kids drawing me pictures of stick figure rangers and asking when Uncle Mark was coming to visit. Sarah, who would spend the rest of her life wondering what happened to me in this godforsaken canyon. My hand froze inches from the shard. The whispers rose to a shriek of frustrated rage, and the pool began to churn with shadows that reached up like grasping fingers. The skeletal circle turned toward me with accusation in their empty stares. How dare I reject the gift they had accepted so willingly? But the memory of Sarah's voice had awakened something the canyon couldn't touch. The stubborn, irrational human love that chooses family over transcendence, mortality over eternal servitude. I wasn't ready to become something else, no matter how beautiful the promises. I pulled my hand back and stepped away from the pedestal. The whispers became a roar of wind through stone, and the chamber itself seemed to convulse with rage. Stalactites began to fall like spears, shattering against the stone floor with sounds like breaking bones. The pool's surface erupted in geysers of dark water that smelled of decay and forgotten dreams. The canyon's spirit, the vast alien intelligence that had been sleeping in these rocks since the world was young, finally showed itself fully. It rose from the pool like a storm-given form, a writhing mass of shadow and hunger that filled the chamber with its presence. I could feel its fury washing over me in waves, but underneath the anger was something else, surprise. It had been so long since anyone had resisted at the final moment. "You cannot leave," it spoke without words, its voice resonating in my bones. "You have seen too much, know too much. You belong to us now." I fumbled for another emergency flare, but my pack was empty. I had used the last one to escape the shadow figures. The spirit advanced, and I felt my will beginning to crumble under its assault. It was right, I had gone too far down its path to turn back now. Soon I would be sitting with the others, adding my voice to their eternal song. But then I remembered something else. The crack in the canyon wall where I had first emerged, the way the morning light had seemed to burn away the phosphorescent illusions. If I could reach it, if I could bring real sunlight into this place of ancient darkness. I ran for the passage that led upward, the spirit's roar following me like physical force. The tunnel walls began to close in, trying to trap me, but desperation gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I clawed my way through narrowing spaces, feeling stones scrape away skin and cloth, leaving a trail of blood that the canyon eagerly absorbed. Behind me, the spirit flowed like liquid darkness, filling the passage with its presence. I could feel its ancient hunger pressing against my back, promising that if I stopped running, if I just turned around and accepted my fate, the pain would end and I would find the peace I had always been searching for. But I kept climbing, following the scent of sage and the promise of clean air. The passage twisted and branched, creating a maze designed to confuse and disorient, but some deeper instinct guided me toward the surface. Perhaps it was the same survival mechanism that had saved countless humans throughout history, the primal need to reach light and safety that burned brighter than any alien compulsion. The walls began to glow with the first hint of dawn as I squeezed through the final crevice and emerged onto a ledge halfway up the canyon wall. Behind me, the crack sealed itself with a grinding sound like the world's largest door slamming shut. The spirit's furious voice became muffled, distant, but I could still feel its attention focused on me like a malevolent spotlight. I had escaped the immediate trap, but I wasn't free. The canyon's influence had taken root too deeply in my mind. Even now, standing in the clean morning air, part of me wanted to find another way down, to return to the pool and complete what I had started. The obsidian shard called to me from the depths, its dark song promising that this rebellion was only temporary. Eventually, I would come back. They always came back. But first, I had to try something desperate, something that went against every instinct the canyon had implanted in my mind. I had to warn others. The climb down to the canyon floor was treacherous, but I made it without falling, driven by a purpose that felt both foreign and familiar. At the ranger station, I sat down at my computer and began to type a report that would never see official channels, a detailed account of everything I had experienced, every horror I had witnessed, every warning sign that future visitors should watch for. My hands shook as I described the whispers, the runes, the pool of dark water, and its congregation of willing dead. With each word, I felt the canyon's displeasure growing, a pressure in my skull that threatened to crush rational thought. But I persevered, driven by the memory of my sister's voice and the faces of innocent hikers who might stumble into the same trap that had nearly claimed me. When I finished, I encrypted the file and sent copies to 3 different email accounts with instructions to publish everything if I disappeared. It wasn't much, but it was something, a record of the truth that might save lives, even if it couldn't save my own soul. Because I knew with sick certainty that this wasn't over. The canyon had marked me, claimed me, and it would never stop calling until I answered. Every sunset would bring whispers on the wind. Every shadow would hide promises of belonging. Every dream would show me the path back to the pool and its patient congregation. I could fight it for days, maybe weeks, but the compulsion would grow stronger with time. The seeds the canyon had planted would sprout and spread until there was nothing left of Mark Patterson but a hollow shell walking through the motions of human life while something else looked out through his eyes. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps I could hold on long enough to steer other potential victims away from the canyon's hidden entrances, to recognize the signs of its influence in fellow rangers and hikers. I could become its guardian in reverse, not protecting the canyon from humanity, but protecting humanity from the canyon. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become exactly what the canyon wanted, a servant dedicated to its needs, but I was using that service to thwart its hunger rather than feed it. It was a small victory, but in a war against forces older than civilization, small victories were all that humans could hope for. I took one last look at the computer screen, at the report that contained everything I knew about Windfall Canyon's true nature. Then I closed the file and walked outside to begin my patrol, knowing that I was walking the edge of a razor blade between salvation and damnation. The canyon waited for me with infinite patience, its whispers following me like old friends. And somewhere in the depths below, an obsidian shard pulsed with dark promise, counting the days until I would inevitably return to claim it. I emerged from Windfall Canyon that morning a changed man, though it would be weeks before I fully understood how profound that change was. My knees shook with exhaustion. My ears rang with the echo of whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The obsidian shard was gone, dropped somewhere in the labyrinthine passages during my desperate flight, but I could still feel its pull like a fishhook embedded deep in my soul. My official report listed only the usual hazards: loose rocks scattered by recent storms, potential flash flood routes that needed monitoring, recommendations for improved trail signage near areas where unwary hikers might wander off marked paths. Standard bureaucratic language that revealed nothing of the ancient hunger lurking beneath the canyon's serene facade. But late at night, when the desert wind carried sounds that resembled voices speaking in forgotten tongues, I worked on other documents. Detailed accounts of everything I had experienced, encrypted files sent to secure servers, warnings disguised as geological surveys that might someday reach the right eyes. I couldn't stop the canyon from claiming future victims. Its influence was too subtle, too patient, too perfectly adapted to human psychology, but perhaps I could plant seeds of doubt, create enough uncertainty to save a few lives. The whispers never truly stopped. They followed me home to my apartment in town, where they mixed with the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic. They whispered through my radio during routine patrols, adding harmonies to dispatch communications that no one else seemed to hear. They sang lullabies in my dreams, promising that my exile from their congregation was only temporary. Eventually, I would tire of fighting my true nature and return to the pool where I belonged. Some nights, I almost believed them. The loneliness of carrying such impossible knowledge was crushing, made worse by the certainty that anyone I tried to tell would think me mad. The canyon had chosen its secret's guardian well. Who would believe a story of alien intelligence sleeping in stone, of pools that reflected impossible futures, of obsidian shards that rewrote human souls with surgical precision? But then I would remember my sister's voice calling my name, remember the faces of tourists who trusted me to keep them safe, remember that somewhere beneath Windfall Canyon's ancient beauty lay a hunger that had been feeding on human dreams for millennia. And I would find the strength to fight the whispers for another day. I still patrol those trails, still file those sanitized reports, still smile and nod when visitors ask about the canyon's geological formations. But I watch them carefully, looking for signs of the canyon's influence, listening for changes in their voices that might indicate they've heard something they shouldn't have. Because the canyon is patient, and I know it's still singing its siren song to anyone willing to listen. And some nights, when the desert is quiet and the stars shine with unusual brightness, I swear I could hear those ancient runes whispering through my dreams, counting down the days until I finally come home. If you felt that chill reading about Windfall Canyon, hit like, subscribe for more ranger horrors, and tell me in the comments, what's the scariest whisper you've ever heard in the wilderness? Have you ever felt a place calling to you in ways that defied explanation? Share your stories, but be careful what secrets you might be carrying back with you from the wild places of the world.